Hello, my name is Owen, and welcome to a quick review of Octavia E. Butler's Kindred. What I want to do is give a brief overview of the books about tell you the things that I liked and tell you the things that I didn't like. Jumping straight into it, this is a science fiction, historical fiction hybrid. It follows our main character of Dana. She is an African-American woman in the modern day, which in this case is the late 70s when this book was written, who gets teleported essentially back in time randomly to the antebellum South. She encounters a kid, his name is Rufus, and she quickly learns that Rufus is her ancestor and she needs to keep him alive or else she will never be born. And if that sounds abrupt, that's how abrupt it is in the book. We're really thrown straight into the action, which is something that I actually found very refreshing about this book. I didn't know too much about this book. I just know that people liked it. People thought it's a fantastic read, and I knew like the concept that she goes back in time. I didn't know the method in which she goes back in time, the context, and we're really not given any of those. She just literally feels dizzy and she wakes up there, and we don't get any more explanation than that. This is not about the science fiction aspect of it. There is time travel involved, but it's like not important. I mean, it's important. It's obviously a plot device, but it's like the nitty gritty, the science of it is like not at all relevant. So I'm almost like hesitant to call it science fiction. The only thing science fiction about it is that it has time travel, but it's really not the focus. And it's got its pros and cons because I do really like how it threw me straight into the action there. I was a little worried knowing the concept of the book we were going to get too far into it before the first like time travel portion. Maybe it's going to get too like, oh, I built the machine and I accidentally fell in, or like stuff like that. But no, it really just is random. But I found it surprising that it never gets explained. The mystery of why she goes back in time, what's causing her to go back in time, it becomes relevant at certain moments, only in the sense that she thinks about, is this relevant? Like what happens like after Rufus births my next ancestor? What happens then? Do I stop traveling? Do I immediately get sent back? Like, what is the physics of it? She asks that questions a couple times throughout the story, but it never gets answered. We get no concrete answers about how this is working, if it will ever happen again, what triggered it in the first place. So if you are more interested perhaps in like the science fiction-y explanations of things, you do not get that, which I was a little bit disappointed that we didn't get more of that. But overall, I thought it helped the pace, and it really was not the focus of the story. Butler really wanted to just explore this antebellum South, like these plantation owners, these slaves, and they lived through the lens of a modern day African American woman experiencing them. That is the main point of the book, and she does a fantastic job at really capturing it and providing a realistic perspective of Dana as she gets teleported back there. All fantastically done, and that is the focus, not necessarily how she got there. It was basically like, I have a very cool idea, but I need to do some science fiction stuff to get her there, and I do not care to figure something out there, which honestly, I respect. And more authors should do with wacky concepts. I feel like, and this is maybe more relevant in like fantasy, but I read a lot of fantasy, so that's why I'm thinking of it. If you have like a really cool idea for a fantasy setting, I feel like authors nowadays are like so obsessed with like the world building and like explaining the magic system, which some authors are very good at. Other times it just gets you bogged down in the nitty gritty when it's not about the nitty gritty, right? Tell the story you're willing to tell. And for that, I really enjoyed Kindred in that way. Other things I really liked about this story, I kind of already mentioned, like the character of Dana exploring this antebellum South, how quickly she adjusts to things. She's a very competent character, but she has very realistic reactions to things. I mean, maybe not super realistic. I feel like I would have had a little bit more of like fetal position time if I was teleported 200 years in the past or whatever, or 150 years in the past. But she's very competent, but she also is like very much like, I can't do this because this will happen, and I have to think about this, and when I have my chances back in the present day, how am I going to optimize this in case I get sent back, which she obviously does. So she prepares like a go bag, and she keeps on her at all times, like what kind of supplies can she have on her person that wouldn't look suspicious when she gets teleported back, but would also be very helpful to her. It was very like competent things that like there was no moments where it's like, idiot, like why would you do that when you're teleported back in time? Like you're like a black woman, why are you acting this way? She is very socially aware. And I don't know if socially aware is the right word, but like she just has great awareness about her situation and adapting on the fly. So she's a very compelling protagonist to read. And also like her relationship with Rufus, I I just really like how the author like not put everything into context, but also like the character of Rufus is he's such a difficult character and he's so frustrating, but Butler makes Dana so empathetic that he's a product of his surrounding, and like the effort of Dana trying to mold Rufus into the person that she wants him to be by like modern day standards, and like the dynamic of him not being able to reach that because of the product of society. It's like such great character interactions and very realistic, but I feel like if someone was teleporting every 6 years to interact with somebody from the South, like this is the kind of impact they would have on them. And the relationship that develops between the two of those characters, I think, is the real highlight. It's the real pulse of the book. It's what it's all about. But I thought that was fantastically done and not the angle that I was thinking of. I was thinking like reading this book, it'd be more about the action, right? Of her getting captured, of her being tortured, of her trying to run away and all that stuff. And there's a little bit of that, but it's really about this evolving relationship between Dana and her white ancestor, Rufus, and kind of like them playing off of each other. And it's just not the direction I thought it was going, which I thought was really interesting. And the other thing I liked, kind of going back to maybe the science fiction aspects a little bit, the dynamic of time and how like time in the present day makes longer time. The longer she's in the present day, the more time passes in the past. Imagine saying that again. So there's the moment, and I'm not gonna spoil it because this is like my favorite part of the book. But she learns that she can take people with her. So she takes her husband with her one time, but he gets trapped there. So like the dynamic of like exploring like what happens if you get stuck there for a long time? How does that affect you mentally? That's almost an aspect. I feel like that's one of the negatives almost, because I enjoyed it so much, because it's not explored quite as much as I liked it. As the book extends, she's spending more and more time there, and there's a portion of the book where they both spend an extended period of time in there, and how that affects them in readapting to modern day. What are the kind of things that they picked up by living in the antebellum South for so long, despite being modern day people? How does that make them slightly worse as people, or how does that make them slightly different as people? There's moments where Dana kind of hints at that, hints at the fear of how it's changing her white husband, but I almost wish that it was explored more deeply, and we got a bit better look at her husband Kevin as he spends more time in this world without her and with her, and the slow changes that overcome him just from being immersed in this world, and as well as the changes that are overcoming her. Because we're with Dana, we kind of get a better look about like how it's changing her behavior, how it's changing the way she sees the world, especially in the South. But there's kind of hints there that she's worried about her husband and his exposure to it without a fault of his own, just being exposed in that culture in that time period. But I wish it was kind of hammered home a little bit, because I thought that was so interesting, especially with the time dilation. Also, the mystery of when she gets sent back to the present day and she returns to the South, what's the world going to look like? How much time passed? How much changed? And that's like classic sci-fi stuff. It's kind of like Interstellar, right? Like they're on the planet for 10 minutes and it's 40 years at home. It's kind of like that a little bit, except it's like we're checking in with Rufus' character growth when she wasn't there. How much things have gone to the worse or maybe for the better. And then like Dana being like teleported in and out at random times. It's just such an interesting plot device, and I love time travel. And I think that part was really well done as well. So overall, and I don't want to get into too much specifics, guys, because I want you to read this book without getting there. I just wish at some points there was, I guess my complaints are all the same, right? I just wish like some things were explored a little bit more, or maybe it was just a little bit longer. The only negative I would say in terms of the plot, sometimes it does get a little bit repetitive. I would say towards like the latter half of her relationship with Rufus, it gets very repetitive, where he enters young adulthood. He's very stubborn and he's very ingrained in the Southern culture, and they have like the same argument for a decent period of the book. And if you read it, you know what I'm talking about. And I was wishing for a little bit more. I feel like that would have been a good point for maybe more explanation of the sci-fi nature of her continuing the line, and maybe how that's changing things or how it doesn't change things, and like how she could escape this time loop essentially. And then also the period of them adjusting back to modern day life. I think that could have been done a little bit more as well. It kind of ends fairly abruptly, and I think that could have been expanded out a little bit as well. But it's just really character focused, and it's almost like she's in there to protect Rufus and to save his life until the specific things happen. And once it happens, the story is done, and we really don't spend any more time with with the characters. I think it ends in a satisfying way. It ends in a satisfying note for the characters and the journey that they're going on. I just almost wish there was a little bit more, I guess would be my greatest criticism of the book. But overall, very, very fascinating piece of literature. A lot of fun to read, very easy to read, and such an interesting concept that, like, I just wish there was more, right? And it was so good, and I really enjoyed it. That's basically, like, the overview of my thoughts. It really just tickled my fancy, and it just felt like a accurate depiction of the South from the perspective of like the slaves and how they were treated on like a good plantation, which is such like an interesting way, like, to explore history in that way. Because I feel like a lot of times, like, we get like either like the very, very bad end of it, or we get like Gone with the Wind, where it's all very like glorified, which you get less of that today, thankfully. But and it's also interesting, there's a moment in the book, and I was gonna wrap it up, but I guess I'm just gonna say that there's a moment in the book where Dana like watches, I think she watches, or she like reads, but I think she watches Gone with the Wind just to try to learn as much as possible before she gets teleported back in time about this time period. And I just think it's so interesting, like, how competent she was as a protagonist and the things that she does to like try to prepare to get randomly shunted back to the 1800s, where she's like probably the most dangerous time for her to be alive in America. Just a great conflict, and it's really, really fascinating, and I do highly recommend the book. Check it out, and be sure to like and subscribe if you like the video and you want to see more like in the future. And as always, thanks for sticking around.